We are continuing our series on eschatology, and in the last video we began responding to popular arguments for the pre-tribulation rapture. If you didn't see the last video, go back and watch that one before continuing here. Now in the last video, I ended by pointing out that there is no pre-tribulation rapture in the book of Revelation. Now this seems very problematic for the view because based on the futurist interpretation of Revelation, Revelation is supposed to be an outline of future events, and yet there is no pre-tribulation rapture to be found. Some pre-tribulationists will appeal to Revelation 4:1 as evidence for a pre-tribulation rapture. In that passage, John is told to come up here for his heavenly vision. Jack Hibbs of Calvary Chapel explains this argument.
Now let's look at this. Revelation chapter 4, verse 1. After these things I looked, and behold, John says, a door standing open in heaven, and the first voice which I heard was like that of a trumpet speaking to me, saying, come up here, and I will show you things that must take place after this. But from Revelation 4:1 on, the church is never again seen in heaven, never again mentioned. With all that's being poured out on the earth, the church is not there. The church never meets the Antichrist. Notice, a door's open in heaven. Come up here, and I will show you things which must take place after this. After what? After you're up here. Isn't that great?
Is this a good argument for the pre-tribulation rapture? Well, like in our last video, let me point out several problems that I see with this argument. Problem number one, there is no good reason in the text to believe that John represents the church in this passage. John as an individual is told to come up here and not the church. And there's nothing unusual about John's heavenly journey. As Thomas Schreiner points out in his commentary on Revelation, here we have the kind of heavenly journey that is common in apocalyptic literature. In fact, the same thing happens to John in Revelation 17:1, when he is told, come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute. John is then taken away to the wilderness. And again in Revelation 21:9, John is told, come, I will show you the bride. John is then taken away to a great high mountain. Now these passages do not mean that the church will be taken away to the wilderness and then taken away to a great high mountain. And neither does Revelation 4:1 mean that the church will at that point be taken to heaven. That's because these passages are talking about John and not the church. And this leads to our second problem. Problem number two, John's location changes between heaven and earth throughout the book of Revelation. In Revelation 4:1, he is in heaven, but in Revelation chapter 10, he's back on earth. In Revelation 11, he continues to be on earth, but then in 11 verse 15, he's back in heaven. In Revelation 17:3, he's back on earth, and then in Revelation 19, he's back in heaven. Now, if John and his location is supposed to symbolize...
I'm sure the word you were looking for was symbolism. What is the symbolism?
Symbolize the location of the church, does this mean that the church will be commuting back and forth between heaven and earth during the tribulation? If not, why would we think that John's location and him being told to come up here represents the rapture of the church and the church's location? Problem number three. Notice that in Revelation chapter 11, the two witnesses are killed and resurrected. They are then told to come up here, and they went up to heaven in a cloud. Now this sounds very much like a rapture passage. In fact, some would argue even more so than Revelation 4:1, since it mentions them going up to heaven in a cloud, which is reminiscent of Paul in 1 Thessalonians 4, where he says that we will be caught up together in the clouds to meet the Lord. So is this passage in Revelation 11 evidence for a post-tribulation rapture, as some would argue? Do we now have two raptures in the book of Revelation? A pre-trib rapture and a post-trib rapture? Why would we say that Revelation 4:1 is a rapture passage, but not Revelation 11:12? If you do say that, then what I think you're doing is cherry picking. You are picking and choosing the verses that support your view and ignoring the rest. But that is not exegesis. That is eisegesis. That is reading your view into the text. Our fourth and final problem with this argument is that in the book of Revelation, there is no description of any kind of the Lord's return until Revelation chapter 19. There is only one return of Christ in the book of Revelation. There is no teaching about any kind of two-stage coming. There is no indication that the church will be raptured prior to the tribulation. Rather, what we see are the saints on earth suffering and being persecuted for their faith during the tribulation. All of this reflects the lack of textual support for the pre-tribulation rapture. Notice that Revelation 1:7 describes the return of Jesus as a very public and announced coming. It says, "He is coming with the clouds, and every eye will see him, even those who pierced him, and all the tribes of the earth will wail on account of him." There is no description in the book of Revelation of the church being raptured prior to the tribulation. Again, this is something that must be read into the text. Even John Walvoord, who is a pre-tribulationist and former president of Dallas Theological Seminary, does not think that Revelation 4:1 is a picture of the rapture of the church. I'm going to quote him at length here from his book, The Revelation of Jesus Christ. "The invitation to John to come up hither is so similar to that which the church anticipates at the rapture that many have connected the two expressions. It is clear from the context that this is not an explicit reference to the rapture of the church, as John was not actually translated. In fact, he was still in his natural body on the island of Patmos. He was translated into scenes of heaven only temporarily. There is no authority for connecting the rapture with this expression. The rapture as a doctrine is not a part of the prophetic foreview of the book of Revelation." I think that is quite an admission from Walvoord. Now, of course, he still holds to the pre-tribulation rapture view and attempts to give arguments for that view, one of which is based on the absence of the word church during the tribulation in Revelation. We looked at that argument in the last video. I'm going to end this video by quoting Robert Gundry from his book, The Church and the Tribulation. This quote is a little long, but I think it's important, and I think Gundry is correct in his assessment regarding the problem with the pre-tribulation rapture view. Gundry says this: "The book of Revelation treats final events in fuller detail than does any other portion of the New Testament. Yet not a single verse in Revelation straightforwardly describes a pre-tribulational rapture of the church or advent of Christ. Rather, the book begins with a terse description of Christ's return, acknowledged by all to be post-tribulational, and climaxes with a detailed description of that same advent. Furthermore, the purpose of the apocalypse is to show to his bondservants the things which must shortly take place. For the church, by far, the most important event shortly to take place is the pre-tribulational return of Christ, if there be such. Yet though John provides minute delineations of tribulational events and of the post-tribulational advent, and addresses and relates his book to churches, not a syllable depicts a pre-tribulational return of Christ. It is incongruous that the major book of prophecy in the New Testament, written to churches for the express purpose of instructing them regarding final events, should not contain a full description of the hope of the church, and yet in its major portion painstakingly chronicles events which, according to pre-tribulationism, have no direct bearing upon the church."